Well, everyone here, I'm sure, has heard of the Apostles' Creed. You say it quite often in your morning prayers, your rosary, and whatnot. You've certainly heard of the Nicene Creed. We'll recite it together just after the sermon as part of the Mass. But how many of you have actually heard of the Athanasian Creed? It was a creed, a very beautiful one, written by St. Athanasius himself, and it begins with these words: "Whosoever will be saved, before all things it is necessary that he hold the Catholic faith, which faith, except everyone do keep entire and inviolate, without doubt he will perish everlastingly." St. Athanasius lived his life by those words. He cherished his faith, his Catholic faith, so much that he would suffer any pain and endure any hardship for its sake. We all know he lived in the time of the Arian heresy, and that St. Athanasius was the Catholic Church's greatest hero for those days. I read somewhere, I never heard it put quite this way with all the numbers, but in order to defend the Catholic faith against Arius, Athanasius endured 50 years of constant conflict. He lived through the reign of 5 different emperors, and he was exiled from his church 5 different times. And yet, his loyalty to the church never wavered. His courage never weakened. People calumniated him and even tried to kill him on occasion. Here's part of his story, much of which comes from the breviary. When St. Alexander died, Athanasius was then chosen to be the patriarch. And when he was chosen, the Arians tried all they could to prevent it, and they would spread rumors about him and try all sorts of other things. The first thing they tried was to falsely accuse him, and they bribed a lady to accuse him of very grave crimes, and she was to go into court and accuse him falsely. Only St. Athanasius knew that this woman had never seen him before in her life. So he got one of his priests, his name was Timothy, to go into the courtroom and pretend that he was Athanasius. So Father Timothy went in and he spoke to the woman and said, "You know me, you've seen me, and you've seen me commit these grave crimes." And the woman swore with an oath that yes, she did see it. And then all the witnesses in the courtroom then realized it was all a calumny and that Athanasius was innocent. So he escaped the first one. Well, then the Arians began spreading a rumor that Athanasius had killed a bishop named Arsenius, and that he must have chopped off Arsenius's right hand and was using it now to cast magical spells. And they were so awful, these Arians, that they even brought in a little container, a box, that actually had a human hand in it, and they showed it in the courtroom. Well, Arsenius had just escaped his imprisonment, just at the moment that Athanasius was being accused falsely. And then Arsenius came to the courtroom with Athanasius, and they showed the judge that here is the bishop, Arsenius, and that he still had 2 hands. So once again, Athanasius escaped. Then finally, St. Athanasius went to Rome and received the Pope's assistance. The Pope believed that he was innocent and gave him permission to have his church back. But as soon as he went and took possession of his see, the Arians immediately drove him out. This time he had to live in a cistern for 5 whole years. They say that no one but his closest friend knew where he was for those 5 years. He never came out, but the friend would deliver his food every day in the cistern. Well, when the emperor died and Julian became emperor, he left the cistern and he entered back to his church. But already Julian put out an edict commanding that Athanasius was to be put to death. And this is that famous story, if you've ever read the book, where Athanasius is out on a ship and the Arians are on a ship as well, out on the sea, and they come right up next to each other. And without knowing it, the Arians were actually talking to St. Athanasius. And they asked him, "Have you seen Athanasius?" And this is the famous story where Athanasius looks at them and he says, "He is not far from here." And the Arians then sail on, and Athanasius was spared again. Well, for these 46 years of his priesthood, he was constantly suffering persecution, and he was never allowed in his church to take care of the souls that were dependent on him. Yet through all of this, St. Athanasius, they say that he was never disturbed by this. It was an interesting thing I read. He used to console himself and others by saying, "This storm will soon pass." And finally, after 50 years, it did. He was able to go back to his church and live in peace. He is a saint for our day. He teaches us to love our faith. He teaches us that we must be willing to suffer all things to keep the faith, not only for ourselves, but the generation after us. We see so many of them here today. If we're not strong to keep the faith, how will they have it when they grow up? And then when they grow up, should they have the faith? If they are not strong, how will their children have the faith? Let us imitate St. Athanasius and pray each and every day for a stronger and stronger and a more living faith. May God bless.